you don't often run into professors from Stanford University. You know, you don't go down the shops or the cafe and run into one. We've got one right here, though. So can we give our professor from Stanford a bit of a... Now, you've worked with all, I mean, pretty cool brands to be involved with, Stanford and Huffington Post and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's not too bad, yeah.
Tell us about how you went from where you started to where you are now.
I was an undergraduate up at the University of Queensland in the early 80s, and I'd get down here playing music and hanging out in Surrey Hills and Ultimo and places like that. But, you know, I was always good at math in high school. And then I did the usual thing that I think, you know, a lot of, you know, oh, you're going to be a lawyer, right? And then I got to uni and I was studying government, and then I never really realized that, oh, all that math and computer stuff could actually be deployed to the study of government. And at that point, becoming a lawyer sort of went to one side.
So were you political? Or?
Oh, yeah, totally as a kid. Yeah, lit up. Like would bore my friends silly because I'd listen to parliamentary debates from Canberra, and I was one of those nerdy kids that used to get a Hansard subscription for 20. Yeah.
That's not. Is there anyone else in the room who did that?
Yeah.
That is.
I remember I was all, you know, in cricket stats. I was that kid.
Okay, wow. So you're a bit of a Wisden fan, etc. So you say, I'm going to combine, I'm going to marry the pleasure I take in politics with statistics.
Yeah, that's the gig.
Basically became a pollster. That's what...
Well, yeah, I do a lot of polling of my own, but the stuff that's gotten the most play is this work where you sort of meta-polling, if you will. You're taking all the published polls out there and using statistical models to put them together. So some of those, in fact, are my own polls, but it's that sort of meta aggregation of polls that we've really had a lot of success with in the last couple of cycles.
I'm a bit concerned to go to specific things because I know that you're as academics are always very careful about comments. But I'm just going to throw them at you, and if you don't feel comfortable, just let us know. The whole gay marriage issue, right, and legalising gay marriage. I keep reading about how we've gone from only a couple of years ago people being quite unsure to a lot of people now supporting marriage equality. Is that what you're picking up here and in the US?
Yes. In the US is obviously the context I'm most conversant with. I thought President Obama coming out on the issue, announcing his evolution on the subject matter was huge. Because what it did a couple of things. It was great from where I sit, because political science has always had this theory that politics is top-down. Leaders can actually lead sometimes. They're not coming to people like us and trying to figure out what public opinion polls are saying. But for Obama to come out and finally announce he'd kind of reached a line on that was huge. And the second reason it was huge, not only because there's a politician leading, but there's an African-American politician leading. What a lot of people don't realize is that the African-American constituency in the United States is one of the more conservative on the topic of gay marriage. And for Obama, an African-American president, to come out and say he was good with it, all of a sudden black politicians around the United States started to fall into line. It became safe for a big chunk of the Democratic Party to get on board. And at that point, I think the floodgates have opened a little bit in the United States. And if anything, Australia is lagging now. We've got New Zealand now. It's very clear which way the momentum's going in the United States. And so where's Australia?
Having said that, only 13 countries have actually bitten the bullet. Is that, or round about that number? It's not a majority yet. It's still...
No. That's right. It's hardly like we'll be... You're right. There's only a couple of countries that have gone all the way.
What I'm saying is, if it changes, we'll still be ahead of the bell curve.
Yeah, globally. But, there's a lot... I think relative to our partners, the countries we compare ourselves with...
Because we are quite a progressive democracy. Yeah. I don't know how much time I've got you for, so I just want to fire a couple more quick questions at you. What happened with the environment? Like, we were kind of 5-6 years ago, gung-ho, Kevin 07, greatest problem, blah, 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 and we're gone cool on it. Is that because we got a couple of big electricity bills and suddenly we don't care about the world anymore? I mean, what happened? 3 letters, GFC, right? 08 came along and scared the living daylights out of every elected politician in the democratic world. Now, that's something I've got opinion data on in both Australia and the United States.
gay marriage rated more as an issue than the environment after the global financial crisis. It was the economy, followed by the economy, followed by the economy. And the environment, particularly in the United States, where the recession was way deeper than here, now is not the time to be starting to do cap and trade or carbon tax, whatever. All of that stuff got flushed right to the bottom of the agenda. And I think a similar thing, perhaps to a lesser degree, happened in other countries as well, including this one, including Australia.
The ALP.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, I know you've been probably reading the headlines. They're a bit smelly at the moment. Their brands are a bit dodgy. How long is it going to be, realistically? I mean, I think everyone expects us on the 14th of September they will lose the election, the federal election. They're clearly down and out in New South Wales for some time. When will the ALP be a credible force, especially federally?
Yeah, okay, so two thoughts about that. One is that it's overestimating the way the pendulum swings is easy to do, right? It's a two-party system. You can't be blown off the map forever, at least not for long. The system tends to have some built-in correction factors. Big majorities, like that the Libs have right now, they'll find ways to screw it up. All of a sudden, same thing in Queensland. Like, the worst thing you can have is 85 members of the parliament, because they've all got to do something. And they're all amateurs, and they're going to make mistakes. And we've already seen that in Queensland. So there's a little bit of that natural, to use some statistics speaks, regression to the mean. The pendulum will swing back kind of almost of its own accord. But the second point to make, though, is to look around the room, and that is to say, political parties are made up of people. I can talk like a scientist about mechanisms, pendulum swinging, as if it's happening on autopilot. But there's real flesh and blood people have to go into those branches, have to decide enough is enough to understand there's only two big games in town in Australian politics, the Conservatives or the ALP, and the Greens, I suppose, right? But they're yet to provide leadership of a state or the nation yet. So if that's what you're aspiring for, you've got to get in there. And if it stinks to you, then you've got a responsibility. You've got to get in there and do it. Don't just wait for the pendulum to swing back of its own accord. Be part of it yourself. And so for that reason, I think it's really about, can we get younger people engaged, and can they get in? And the sooner they do that, I think the better the Labor Party will be.
Now, Professor, I just realised that I have not invited you guys to ask questions of either of our speakers. If you would like to ask a question, we've got plenty of time. So if you would like to ask a question, I'm sorry, I should have done that with our other speakers as well. So that's my bad. While people are getting some questions ready,
sure.
As a political nerd, how much do you love Clive Palmer?
How much do I love what?
Clive Palmer.
Oh, we love stuff like that. We live for it, right? Self-funded people that are just going to blow the whole thing up. I mean, that'll be terrific.
So what kind of impact? Because I know that Joe for
I'm from Queensland. Yeah,
crushed John Howard when the first time he had a tilt, and even though I might not share, many of his views, I mean, I felt sorry for the poor little fella. No, for John Howard when he got so, because I mean, that was rough because he basically got cleaned up by his own team. Is that a fair summation?
I don't feel sorry for the...
No, but I mean, I just feel like politics is a pretty hard game.
It is a hard game.
He went against Peacock for that long. It's...
I think, look, when you sign up for politics as a vocation, right, that's the other thing about it, right? You're wearing a suit 7 days a week. But if that's what you signed up for, then you've got to roll with it. Something like Joe for Queensland is going to come at you. That's the life you signed up for. So I don't feel a lot of sympathy or sorrow for these people that are playing the game like that. And it worked out pretty well for John Howard in the end, by the way.
Well, that's true. What about Clive and Bob Katter, though? Like, how much of an impact will they have?
I think Katter's going to be a bigger factor than Palmer. Palmer is, I live in the States, so every time I see Palmer on my ABC feed, that I look at when I'm in California, looking back here, I just think Donald Trump. Just this cartoonish buffoon of a character that is really about sort of promoting his business interests, using politics as a way to get eyeballs for his next big announcement about some cruise ship or something. He's just not a serious player. Katter, on the other hand, Katter has made a career out of people underestimating him. Don't underestimate Bob Katter. He understands his electorate. He understands the way Queensland works. At a at a level that, is dirt under the fingernails type sensibility about the way that works. I don't know what traffic they'll have outside of Queensland, but in a year where Labor is on the nose and votes are looking to go elsewhere, Katter in Queensland, I think, could be something to keep an eye on.
Because, of course, we expect him to take his seat up in far north Queensland, but will he take 2, 3, 5?
I keep an eye on what happens in the Senate in Queensland. I don't know about any particular House seats. Could make some mischief with preference flows and stuff like that, but keep an eye on the Senate race in Queensland.
Have you got a question? Can you, in a big voice, can you tell us, or do you want to come up and... I'm just realising that the web stream, people aren't going to hear any of this, even though we can hear. So I will get you on mic. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. For Professor Jackman, as I understood your speech, you're getting better at predicting polling outcomes as a result of being able to go to internet polling and to the analysis of other polls. And as the sample gets larger, the accuracy of the prediction is going to get better. Do you think that's going to translate into other things other than polling? So movements of population, behavioural, attitudinal stuff? Yeah, I think it is. I think it's look, politics is one of the last realms to be touched by the data revolution. I think it's already happened in business, in marketing. It's happening in the way governments are collecting data, are analysing, are doing policy evaluation. I think mass electoral politics, though, is one of the last realms. I mean, it's happened in sports. It happened in sports, the data revolution, before we really got to politics. So I think, yes, indeed, it is happening. It's happening, I think, perhaps, I get back to Australia sort of only for month-long chunks at a time, but I know in the United States, they've got our household bracketed. They know exactly what catalogue to send my wife and I, given our family structure, given the kind of clothes she likes, given the kind of stuff we like to do, for holidays and what have you. The precision with which we're being marketed to tells me that the cat's out of the bag with respect to these other realms, with respect to marketing. And if anything, I think politics is playing a little bit of catch-up ball, in part because, a US presidential election that, all the resources come together for that. That's once every 4 years. And there's really only been 2 post-data revolution elections, 8 and 12, where we've seen it. The thing about America as well, the parties don't really exist. They come together to help elect a president, and then they kind of dissolve back into the ether. And so you really only see these big spikes in the use of data around the presidential election. But in other realms of society, it's a constant presence in our lives, and if anything, tracking up over time. Yeah.
So commercially and with statistics, Aussies are much far behind. Aussie businesses are further behind.
I would hesitate to say that, actually. I think the really amazing thing about Australian business is how competitive it is, how well integrated in the global economy it is. To say that Australian business is behind the 8 ball on this sort of stuff, that would be a big call on my part. Australia's an easy case, by the way. 23 million people, most of them living in major metro areas. As a data management, as a modelling proposition, getting your arms around the Australian adult buying, consuming population is a much easier proposition than, I'd say, a big, crazy, riotous country like the United States.
The complexity. We've got another question. Just tell us who the question is for, and then give us a question.
Just really curious to know, you often hear politicians will say, I don't follow polls. I don't wake up in the morning. If I did, I'd be up and down. So it's 2 parts. A, do you think they do follow the polls? And B, should they?
Yes and yes. They do. You bet they follow the polls. And they should, right? Because polls, you'd rather know than not know, and you'd rather be able to deliver people, things they want than what they don't want. And, we may not like it, but that's called democracy. And I think of polls as an integral part of the game now. The same way we talk about the media being the 5th estate, data and polling might be the 6th or the 7th or whatever.
Now, while we get another question, I just want to ask this question of the doctor. In terms of Sydney, what is our politics like? Are we a radical city?
I think we used to be a much more radical city in the 19th century and the early 20th century. And there was a lot more sort of grassroots politics, a lot more politics happening out on the streets. But I'd say in the second half of the 20th century, we've become much more conservative.
And why is that? Because we're just more comfortable, got more wealth, we're just physically fatter, so we can't get in.
I think it's partly to do around suburbanisation and growing wealth. When there was a strong working class community in the inner city, there was a lot of issues. There was the union movement was a lot stronger through the 19th and early 20th century as well. And that really changes how people kind of engage in politics.
And the conscription battles of it,
That's right.
Were the leaders of that, it was the working class from up in Paddo and Surrey Hills were the ones likely to be shipped off to the First World War.
That was Billy Hughes versus, was it Bishop Mannix? Am I thinking of the right?
There was a whole lot of people. There was a really polarised debate around those who really wanted to have conscription to really support the war effort and those who didn't.
And was that a kind of Catholic versus Protestant thing as well back then? That particular debate? Not really?
I'm not sure.
It had overhangs of it because Maddox was the Archbishop of Melbourne, and it was seen as a British war, and so the Irish Catholic thing did totally interface with the question of conscription, and of course Irish Catholics formed the backbone of the Labor Party back in those days. That's why it was such a traumatic sort of deal for Australian politics at that moment, the whole conscription debate.
Yes, all those Catholics did them a lot of good in the 50s, didn't it? When they split them down the middle.
This is Labor. This is why you love it. If you love Australian politics, you've got to sort of love the history of the Australian Labor Party, for better or for worse. No matter what side of politics you're on, by the way.
Another question.
I think a lot of, this is to both of you, I think politics these days takes it for granted that it is a two-party system that you mentioned. What would it take for people to decide to vote outside the box, and consequently, what would happen with other parties to take on the kind of responsibility that the two-party preferred seem to think they have? That's
a great question.
I guess that's on me. It's really, really tough. Sure, I got you. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to break out of the strong, incentives for two parties to dominate Australian politics. Compulsory voting, preferential voting. By law, you are required, if you're on the electoral roll, you are required by law to show up and to state a preference that's somewhere on the ballot paper for the big party on the left over the big party on the right, or vice versa. And you can vote one Green, right? But at some point you're doing a rank ordering of the big party of the left over the big party of the right, or vice versa. That's hardwired into the Australian system. What's interesting is the way that we've just seen Greens get elected in a few House seats. And the question is, can more of that happen? It's almost a threshold argument. Green support, it's no good to you to get 8% of the vote, to get 10 to 12 to 20. But once you start getting in the high 20s, once you start getting up towards 30, all of a sudden you're starting to talk about a threshold where you get preferences distributed to you, right? Rather than being a party that's preferences just go to someone, help someone else get elected. And so that's the challenge, I think. If you wanted to do something, you've really got to hone in on those parts of the country where you might be able to pull that off. And so I think Grayndler, is sort of an interesting case up the road here. It's already happened to some extent, in Melbourne. There's the concentration of Green support has got enough to sort of trip that critical threshold. I'm just wondering where the next place in Australia will be.
Just remind us where Grayndler is again?
Grayndler.
Oh, that is Anthony Albanese's seat, right, around Marrickville.
No offence to Albo.
No.
But
or we change our system of voting, we make it first past the post, or do something else to change that kind of preferential
you'd need,
flows.
right, and it'd be a change to the institutional rules of the game that would, right, think about if we had the Senate system down at the House level. Game changer.
right? But we're talking about that magnitude of
a serious, structural change. Lisa and Simon, thank you so much. Can we hear it for our two speakers, please?
Thank you.